Okay, so picture Victorian London. We think of it as this sprawling, incredible city, right? The heart of a global empire, just gleaming with progress and power. But that's just the surface. Underneath all that glitter, there was this other world, a hidden world, festering with poverty, neglect, and crime. And tonight, we're going right down into the thick of it with a journalist who just refused to look away as our guide. And this quote from our guide, James Greenwood, really sets the stage perfectly. He got something about his society that's, well, pretty timeless. You know how it is. A big scandal breaks. People get outraged. There's this wrathful blast in the papers. And then what? Nothing. The outrage fades, and the problem just pops its head right back up. Greenwood saw this happen over and over, but he wasn't going to let that storm just pass. He wanted to get down into the muck and see what was really going on.
See, Greenwood wasn't just a reporter. He was more like an urban explorer, a sociologist with a notebook. And he came back with this radical idea. He argued that London wasn't just dealing with criminals, it was actively manufacturing them. For him, crime wasn't some simple moral failing. Nope, it was the predictable end product of a broken system. So, let's follow him down the rabbit hole.
Our journey starts right where Greenwood says the whole problem begins, in the nursery. But look, this is not a nursery with lullabies and loving care. This is what he called the nursery of crime. It's the place where the raw material, children, are shaped from the moment they're born for a life of vice.
For so many families back then, disaster was just one step away. Maybe the father, the main breadwinner, got sick or died. Suddenly, you had nothing. The only place to go was the parish workhouse. But this wasn't a safety net, it was a brand. The moment you entered, you and your children were labeled. And as Greenwood points out, they were officially categorized with this awful, dehumanizing language. Before a kid could even walk, they were already marked as worthless. Now, imagine you're a young, unmarried mother, or just a woman so poor you can't feed another mouth. The shame and horror of the workhouse were unbearable. And so, for these women, a new, dark little industry started to pop up, advertising quietly in the back of newspapers. It offered a discreet solution to the problem of an unwanted baby.
And that solution was called baby farming. Here's how it worked. A mother could hand over her infant, pay a one-time fee, and the child would just disappear. Let's be brutally honest here. This transaction was built on a terrible, unspoken agreement. This was not childcare. This was disposal. The fee wasn't to raise the child. It was to make sure the child was never a problem again. This is where it gets really chilling. Greenwood doesn't just tell us about this. He shows us using official court records. This is a direct quote from a coroner's inquest into a woman named Mrs. Saville. The exchange is just so cold and matter of fact. You keep, in fact, a baby farm. And the witness just calmly states that, yeah, 5 of the 11 kids in her care had recently died. No investigation, no questions asked, just gone. 45%. Let that number sink in. In just this one case at this one woman's house, that was the death rate. Almost half the babies that were handed over to her died. And this wasn't some shocking anomaly. This was pretty much the business model. A child's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a predictable and maybe even a welcome outcome. And if you think it couldn't get any worse, Greenwood hits us with this one, final gut-wrenching detail. A little boy named Frederick John Wood, one of the victims, wasn't even given a proper burial. His body was put in an old, discarded egg box. His whole life and his death were treated like trash, worth no more than the box he was buried in. Okay, so let's say a child somehow survived this nightmare of a start. They weren't left at a baby farm, they didn't waste away in the workhouse. What's next? Well, society had a very specific curriculum waiting for them. For the kids living on the street, there was an entire educational system ready to teach them, but not an honest trade. It was a school for scoundrels. And the main classroom in this school was a place called the Penny Gaff. Think of it as a cheap, dirty little theater, but one that was almost exclusively for the poorest kids. For just 1 penny, they could get off the filthy streets and step into a world that would systematically twist their moral compass into a pretzel. As Greenwood describes them, these places weren't just entertainment. They were, in his words, hotbeds of vice, packed with kids from 8 to 16 years old. And the message they got from the stage night after night was simple and clear. Crime is cool, the law's for fools, and thieves are the heroes. So what was on the syllabus? Well, you had plays glorifying dashing highwaymen, stories celebrating seductive criminals like someone called Starlight Sal. They'd even reenact the most brutal and famous crimes of the day. The police were always idiots, authority was always a joke, and stealing was presented as this heroic, exciting adventure. This was their moral education. And the lessons didn't stop when the curtain fell. For another penny, these kids could buy cheap serialized magazines called penny numbers. They were kind of like the comic books of their day, and they were filled with these graphic, shocking illustrations that just reinforced everything they'd seen on stage. It was a total immersive media bubble that screamed, "Crime is awesome." Greenwood just nails the psychological effect of this stuff. He describes this little boy who can't even read, staring at a picture of his highwayman hero trapped at a toll gate. The kid is just tormented, desperate to know if the gatekeeper is helping his hero escape or not. Greenwood says the boy would give his last penny just to find out. See, he's not just a spectator. He is emotionally invested in the criminal winning. He needs the bad guy to get away.
So, after a childhood of pure neglect and a full education in vice, we finally get to the finished product. The professional thief. Now, in the public's imagination, this was some kind of romantic, terrifying supervillain. But Greenwood, as always, is there to pull back the curtain and show us the sad, grim reality. You have to remember, the popular novels and newspapers had created this whole mythology around London's criminal class. People pictured these secret thieves' dens full of swashbuckling rogues, drinking and singing and plotting these incredible heists. It all sounded so defiant and dangerous and exciting. And this wasn't just some pulp fiction idea. Even the highest levels of society believed it. Greenwood points to a speech made in the House of Lords by a famous reformer, Lord Shaftesbury, and he describes this almost cartoonish vision of the underworld with these Fagin-type masterminds in secret cellars literally melting down stolen gold. It's a scene straight out of Oliver Twist. But then Greenwood does what he does best. He decides to go see for himself. He manages to get a ticket to a thieves' benefit, basically a raffle to raise money for a buddy who got arrested. He went in expecting a den of villains. What he found was something else entirely. The gap between the myth and the reality was just massive. He didn't find any rollicking desperados. He found a room full of tired, washed-out, anxious-looking men. They weren't chugging brandy. Most of them were nursing a single pot of beer, trying to make it last all night. And the music? No defiant criminal anthems. They were singing these sad, sentimental ballads like My Pretty Jane. The whole thing wasn't exciting. It was pathetic, dreary, and kind of sad. So Greenwood walks us through the whole process, from beginning to end. From that abandoned baby in the egg box coffin to the sad washed-out thief singing a ballad in a pub. And when you see it all laid out, you realize he's not describing a series of separate problems. He's describing a single, perfectly designed, inescapable machine. It's a vicious cycle, and it's self-perpetuating. Step 1, neglect. A child is born and immediately treated as if they're worthless. Step 2, indoctrination. That child is then taught a criminal value system. Step 3, profession. This leads them into a life of crime, which turns out to be a grim, desperate struggle, not some grand adventure. And finally, step 4, perpetuation. Society's only response is punishment, with no path to get out, which just guarantees the whole cycle starts over with the next generation. And this right here is Greenwood's final damning thesis. The criminals that were filling up London's prisons weren't monsters. They weren't a glitch in the system. They were the product of the system. They were the logical, predictable output of a society that first abandoned its children and then schooled them in how to be criminals. London, he basically argued, was its own worst enemy. And we're going to end with the question that just haunts this entire investigation. A young boy, a thief, is let go by a magistrate, and he asks this simple, impossible question. He's been neglected his whole life. He's been taught to be a thief. He has no other skills. The magistrate tells him, go be honest, but offers zero help, no leg up, as the boy calls it. So he asks, however am I to get into honest ways? And that was the question the city simply refused to answer, leaving that boy, and thousands just like him, with only one road left to walk down.